Hey, it's Michael Douglas. Welcome back to another In Brief here on Dr. Pundit. And this is kind of like another homage to Ozzy Osbourne. Of course, he passed away, had a huge funeral that was live streamed worldwide. It was just a great send-off for this highly influential artist. And again, as viewers of this channel know, I'm not a diehard metal fan, but I know enough about this genre to have likes and dislikes. And the whole Black Sabbath catalog, Ozzy Osbourne catalog, I'm certainly familiar with some titles more than others, and the minority of titles as opposed to the majority. But I wanted to talk briefly about this today because, of course, as expected, he had 2 albums launch into the Hot 200, the Billboard 200 album chart, on the heels, of course, his passing. And one of those is in the top 10 this week, Ozzy Osbourne's Essential Collection, the Essential Ozzy Osbourne, in at number 7. And at number 37, Black Sabbath with their second LP, Paranoid. And again, it just proves that 1970 was the year that I think metal began, and it began with Black Sabbath. You know, in this old warhouse of an album, Paranoid suffers from an all too common condition afflicting most bands' best known work, or one of their best known works in their catalog: overplaying. And music journalists, radio programmers, you know, ever since I started listening to more classic rock when I was in high school and classic metal, originally from Memphis, Tennessee, but there were a couple of stations that did start playing more classic rock from the late 60s and early 70s at that time, at the mid-1980s. So you had a lot of Zeppelin, you had Black Sabbath. I would probably say we're the top 2 bands that they played in the rotations. Yes, the same 300 songs or whatever, but still. It was a good intro for me into this genre of music, of course. And I think unknowingly, a lot of radio stations, when they play these, yes, it's all about revenue, getting the audience, but you can kind of run some of these tunes into the ground, and, you know, these albums get hammered into our brains. Well, in my case, again, if I had to say the percentage of time I was listening to stations like this in high school, it was probably like 25%. The vast majority of the stations I listened to were R&B stations because that's the music I enjoy the most. But I enjoy rock in some subgenres better than others, or more than others. And classic metal is one of them. And a lot of it has to do with Ozzy Osbourne. And, you know, that being said, I'll just say my little spiel about Paranoid. It was their second album in 1970. They had really capitalized on their, the strength of their debut. And it still featured the doom metal they had on their original debut album earlier that year, which devastatingly is seen on tracks like War Pigs and Hand of Doom, which closes out the album. But the selection of songs this time around is a little bit more varied, and it proved that the group wasn't just a one-trick pony. They were definitely here to stay. Well, at that time, and I think really wanted to say, yes, here we are, we're staking our claim. Paranoid was a great album which to do that. Never has a quickie throwaway single been as influential as the title track. Yeah, I mean, it set a precedent, I think, for what was known as more speed metal later. It made use of the riff that I think served as the basis for that kind of metal genre or subgenre. And the band was experimenting then. I mean, they were experimenting with tracks like Planet Caravan, kind of a blues undertone there. And it was just a more varied album. And it certainly did not suffer from the sophomore slump, that's for sure. And the band even proved their kind of light side, funny side, with the track Fairies Wear Boots, which kind of went off on, I guess, people who criticized the band and their looks, for having long hair and that kind of thing. But it also presaged the more lighthearted odes to pot, weed and other illegal substances that would make appearances on later albums, particularly Master of Reality. And I don't think that the band was ever more adept lyrically than on this album. And it really showed in Ozzy Osbourne's delivery, and it presaged, I think, his solo career. And again, referring to the song Hand of Doom, I think this song is an eloquent, dare I say, eloquent look at the end of the hippie era and the effect that this disillusion had on many at that time. And I would say if you had to compare this to their debut, that, again, my limited knowledge of this band, even though I've been listening to them for a few years or whatever, I would say that I like this album, slightly better than their debut in 1970, simply because it's more varied and they weren't afraid to experiment. But both, I think, are equally essential albums in the band's catalog. And if you're going to start anywhere with Black Sabbath, those are the two albums to start with. So probably my last kind of ode to Ozzy Osbourne for a while here. I wanted to get that in because I was looking at the Billboard 200 charts and I'm like, okay, well, I knew Ozzy Osbourne would be in there, but Black Sabbath, 55 years later in the top 40 of the Billboard Hot 200 album charts, just amazing. So there you go. Another In Brief here on Dr. Pundit. Hope you liked it, and stay tuned for future full episodes on the channel. Thanks for watching.